Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and yes, this is my natural hair color in case you're new here. And today we're talking about maximizing your setups before getting more guns. This is something that I've struggled with in the past, and I'm sure many of you have as well. So I'm gonna break down this concept for everybody to make it a little bit easier to focus on what's important and prioritize things when it comes to being on a budget, and then give you some ideas about how this whole maximization system works. And the first thing we're going to discuss is maximizing your setup, which your setup should be the handgun or rifle or shotgun or whatever it is that you are using as a primary weapon, and how that needs to get all of your attention first, and then we can start exploring other options thereafter. So we're gonna go through that. We're gonna talk about how logistics applies to this whole scenario as well, because that is a very important part of maximizing your setup. And we're gonna talk about what your next gun should be once you have a maximized setup. And my example of a maximized setup is this 10.5 inch 5.56 rifle you see right here, which has all the accessories you would expect and all the capabilities you would expect. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here shortly, but I just wanted to go ahead and show you that this is like a maximized setup in many ways. And I'm sure that a lot of people are still working on something like this, and in the meantime might be mistakenly purchasing other things when this isn't yet complete. The other thing we're gonna talk about is modernization. Because part of maximizing your setup, if I can get this to work right, is fully upgrading what you already have, but only if it's sensible. So modernization of older platforms can work in some regards, and in other times it's actually a waste of your time because what you're trying to accomplish isn't necessarily going to be efficient. So we're gonna talk about all that, and when a stripped down bare bones gun is good enough or when it's acceptable, right after we get a word in from our sponsor. This video sponsor is TacPack. Now, TacPack is a monthly subscription service that supplies you with equipment, accessories, and other items relevant to preparedness. And November's TacPack is the highest value box they've ever sent out. If you sign up for the monthly plus subscription tier, it'll be valued at $446 and only costing you $140 with shipping. And if you use the code READY556, they'll add an additional $110 of value to your TacPack, bringing it up to a total of $556 in overall value, which is huge. Now, of course, TacPacks have a lot of awesome stuff, including SOG fixed blade knives, Enforce weapon mounted lights, Rats tourniquets, Die-Free-Co Kung Fu grips, Mantis dry fire systems, and Terminator hot dogs. Not to mention a whole lot of other awesome stuff coming in November's TacPack. There's really never been a better time to sign up. So make sure you check out TacPack.com, sign up for that monthly plus tier subscription, and use that code READY556 to get a ton of value and to support a great company that not only supports this channel, but also supports the 2A community. All right, big thanks to TacPack for supporting the channel. And of course, if you have a fully maximized setup that you're actually happy with, then hit the subscribe button down below, because there's at least one person on the entire planet that does, and we appreciate you. Now, this particular example is a fully maximized setup. And I want you to think of it the same way as you would in like a video game, where you have that loadout screen and you can select your rifle or your subgun or whatever it is, and then there's little slots for each accessory that you can add. So you can add your optic or your magazine enhancement or a muzzle device or whatever it is. And that applies to your actual gun, in all honesty, because you want to make sure you have all those slots filled where applicable. And we don't just fill slots just because we want to fill slots. That's gonna sound weird later in post-production, but regardless, what I'm trying to say is that you don't need to add things just for the sake of adding them. But if you have requirements of what your build or setup needs to be able to do, and those slots are empty and they need to be filled, then that's something that you should be aware of and working towards. And this setup is fully maximized. We have the optic slot filled out, we have the magazine slot filled out. We'll go ahead and ensure that we're safe here just to appease everybody. And we have the additional optic enhancement slot filled out here too. This is where your magnifier would be. This is a digital magnifier. This is something I'm testing out. We'll talk about that more later, but it is kind of interesting. And then we also have our IR device here at the front. We also have our muzzle device, which makes things a little bit more pleasant to shoot. We have our white light, right? So we have all the things, not to mention some additional accessories when it comes to the actual functionality of the system as well, in order to provide slight enhancements and a little bit more comfort. Right? But at the end of the day, everything's well vetted, everything shoots well, everything is optimized, and there's nothing about this particular setup right here that needs to be changed, and everything works the way it's supposed to, and all the parts are relatively high end, especially when we're talking about having like an aim point optic, a Steiner IR device, like Surefire light over here on the side. Like everything is well vetted from good manufacturers and should last and perform when needed. So why am I bringing this up in this sense? Because this is one of the only rifles I have right now that's actually fully maximized. And this is a 10.5 inch 5.56 upper from Midwest Industries with their enhanced bolt carrier group. It's been flawless. I'm actually super impressed with it, and I actually like it a lot. So good on them for having a good product. And then this is the Aero Precision M4E1 lower, and this whole setup has just been running for a long time now. Everything on it accomplishes the mission at hand. It allows me access to all different types of environments, whether or not it's low light, whether or not it's bright light, whether or not it's close, relatively far to a degree, right? Medium range. And it also is in the size and package that I was hoping it would be, in the sense of being a short barreled rifle. So this is my example of a fully maximized setup, because it covers every single option I could possibly want, besides maybe, you know, some of those heat-seeking options that are out there. But in that situation, there's always clip-ons and other ways to work around that, or maybe that's just not the right setup for this, because you can't do everything with every single thing that you have. And that's just the truth, right? If you have a high magnification rifle scope on a setup like this, then you're not going to be able to have other things like a, you know, flip-to-side magnifier, because that wouldn't make any sense. So you still have to work within the parameters of what you're provided with and what your expectations of use are. And that is where this fills that maximization category, by filling that expectation of use to the fullest degree it possibly can. Now, once you have those accessory slots filled, right? So you're like, all right, I have this setup and I need to maximize it before I buy more guns, because that's the whole thing, right? If we have this with just, let's say, just an optic, right? There's no light, there's no muzzle device, there's no way to use IR or anything like that. And then next thing we do is just go turn around and buy another 10.5 inch AR. We're probably not prioritizing right, because we could be maximizing our setup instead. But we're all in different levels of budget, and we're all at different tiers of capability. And in that situation, there's a good argument to say that you might want to start with some budget accessories to kind of get your foot in the door. So having a less high-end optic would be reasonable, right? Like buying something like a Holosun makes a lot of sense, right? Maybe not having an IR device if you don't have any of the other accessories required to use it makes a lot of sense. Maybe having something like a Streamlight instead of a Surefire, just to have a white light option, makes a lot of sense. And maybe you don't necessarily need a muzzle device like this one, because you're just trying to make sure that you have something that's functional and capable, and that might make a lot of sense. And all those things work, and you are still maximizing your weapon system in the process, but then you can start upgrading those accessories or filling those slots that weren't necessarily important in the beginning, rather than going out and buying another rifle. And rather than buying just more accessories for said other rifle, you can just turn these ones you have into something a little bit nicer. So you can get better, higher quality components. You can order stuff from better manufacturers or whatever it might be, and you're still maximizing that same setup, but you have it usable in the meantime while you're still in that upgrade process, right? So that's what maximizing your setup should be, in the sense of the actual weapon system itself. You want those video game accessory loadout slots filled where applicable, right? Because if, let's say, you don't have a way to use IR, then there's no point of getting IR, right? So we can all understand that and be aware of where we're at in the sense of limitation. But we want all those slots filled that make sense for that rifle. We don't want things left empty just so we can go afford another rifle when we don't even have this one fully set up yet, right? So once we have that, we can then upgrade those accessories over time if we decide that maybe they need to be a little bit more robust, a little bit more durable, a little bit better in the sense of features, whatever it might be. So we can start doing that as well. And that's a great place to be, because now you have a maximized setup that's still being upgraded over time and having, you know, it taken care of in the sense of maintenance and everything else. So this is my maximized setup. The reason you're not seeing my go-to rifle right now is because I am working on finishing the maximization of that rifle setup based on the parameters of the optic setup and based on some other things regarding weight and everything else that I haven't been necessarily fully happy with. When I originally put this D-Ball D2 on that rifle, it was just really heavy, it was really large, it was occluding the optic, it was making things less balanced, and I just had to figure out something else. So that is in process, but because of that and because of then relegating this piece of equipment to this particular setup, now this is fully maximized, and that's why I'm showing it to you as my example. What about logistics? Okay, now this is where things get more interesting because it's not just about the accessories. It's not just about the optic. It's not just about having, you know, any of the actual, you know, functionality the parts regarding functionality be optimized in the sense of enhanced or whatever it might be, but it's also logistics. So what does that mean? So instead of buying another AR, or instead of buying another handgun, or instead of buying whatever other rifle you're considering or firearm you're thinking about or whatever it might be, ask yourself a few questions first, okay? What are those questions? First one is gonna be, how much ammo do I have? Do you have enough ammo to not only train accordingly with this weapon system, but to use it during an emergency situation if things really fall apart, and to maintain your level of training if the supply chain of ammunition gets cut off once again. Now, I know it wasn't fully ever cut off, but it became less accessible because it got extremely expensive, and it's only a matter of time until something like that happens again, right? So because of that, you have to ask yourself, how much ammo do I really have? The ammo you have for this system should, at some point, cost more than the system itself in the sense of how much you've used while training on it. Like, that's just the reality of it because it is a disposable resource and you have to keep getting more in order to keep training and in order to be more proficient. So you should have a lot of ammo. And if you don't, it should be because you're shooting, not because you just don't have any, right? And if you have this rifle fully maximized, which is great, but you don't have any ammo, that's a huge problem, right? So we also have to try to balance that. Where's the ammo in the sense of, am I training, am I shooting, and did I spend all my money on something like an IR device when I don't have any ammo to actually try it out with? Like, those are all considerations to make, but ammo should be first on the logistics thing because without it, you're not training, you're not shooting, and you're not gonna be able to use this system for what it was intended to be used for if that ever comes, right? So I think that's a huge question, and so great, we have our maximized setup. Don't buy that other rifle unless you have enough ammo for this setup to actually make sense and be usable, right? Now, once you have ammo covered, and I'm serious when I say, like, the ammo should cost more than the gun because you're gonna use it. And so you're gonna have to replenish it, and eventually you're going to outprice the weapon with the cost of ammo. And that's just like how it works if you're shooting enough and training enough. And if you're not shooting enough or training enough, then how do you know that the setup you have here or the accessories you're choosing or the stuff you're using actually works the way you want it to, right? So that's another thing that you have to keep in mind. You have to vet all this equipment as well, and you might decide things don't work, like the D-Ball D2 not working on my go-to rifle, which is why it's back on this. So next in the logistics department is gonna be magazines, right? We got our little 20-round magazine here, which I kind of like the 20-round mags because they are, you know, lightweight and balanced, and you can always just pop another one in after or whatever. But regardless, magazines are another disposable resource. I know a lot of people don't dispose them. I don't dispose them either, but you should assume that if anything bad ever happens where we actually need guns like this, and you're using more than one magazine, that you're not going to be worried about maintaining every single magazine that you expend, because if you're at the point of an emergency reload, I don't know if that magazine's a big deal, right? And so magazines are expendable, and they also do eventually break down over time. So you should have a huge stock of magazines as well before buying another rifle or another handgun or whatever else it's gonna be. And so how many magazines do you have? If you have 6 magazines, that's not enough, right? It just isn't. I mean, it's enough to, you know, defend your home, and it's enough to go out to the range, and it's enough to practice with, and all those stuff and things, whatever. But regardless, what I'm saying is that you can still get more, and it's still better to have more. And you know, bare bones, stripped down minimum loadout is 7 mags. So you at least need 7 magazines, but I think those 7 magazines should be at the bare minimum set aside for that time where that might actually be a requirement. And so I made a video a long time ago about like bare minimum magazines for SHTF or something like that. And I said 21 was the bare minimum for a rifle. And so if you don't have 21 mags for your go-to fully set up and maximized setup, then you shouldn't probably be buying another rifle because you're just gonna need that many more mags now. So what you should be doing is getting enough magazines where you at least have like 21, I think. When it comes to handguns, I think that number is far less. I think that you could get away with 6 for most handguns, but I would prefer more. I have many more, which we'll talk about here in a second. But regardless, I think that you need a bunch of magazines. So that is another part of the logistics discussion that we need to, well, anticipate when it comes to what we're doing and what we're prioritizing before buying another rifle that we then have to also set up and then also have to get mags for and everything else. Yes, I know the mags are interchangeable, I understand that, but we're still splitting the difference between systems now, and it's making it less efficient, and meaning that we're gonna need more in order to make up for that inefficiency. So, I'm gonna set this down for a minute here. if I can do that in a productive way, since this just isn't working for me right now. I'm gonna blame the D-ball. There we go. Okay, so, like I said, magazines, even for your pistol. So this is a Glock 45. This is a maximized pistol, okay? So why is it maximized? Because it's a Glock 45 that is fully factory, because that's how I like most of my go-to handguns to be. I want them to be reliable and have longevity, and generally keeping things in factory settings does that for you. And then when it comes to a pistol, this one has the things that I want, AKA an optic and a light. And this one's maximized because it's a good optic, it's an Aimpoint Koa, and it's a good light, so Surefire XR1. Is it the best light? Probably not for SHTF type stuff. Is it the best optic? Time will tell. We're not really sure on that quite yet, but they're both good manufacturers. And that gives me a little bit more peace of mind than having something that's a little bit less vetted, let's just say. So this is a maximized pistol. And yes, magazines matter for this as well. And your magazines are extremely important for all your firearms, and they should be high quality. I suggest, honestly, Magpul PMags mostly for AR-15s and setups like that. Lancer mags seem to work pretty well, but in the future, I'm probably just gonna mostly buy Magpul PMags because they just work and they're relatively accessible. And then when it comes to pistols, no matter what pistol it is, I always suggest the factory magazines. I don't care if Metgar figured out a way to add one additional round into a Glock mag. That one round doesn't matter to me as much as reliability, and your magazine is a huge failure report in a pistol, so you need Glock mags. And I have a ton of Glock magazines because a Glock is part of my preparedness plan due to logistics, which is what I'm trying to say about this whole conversation right now. Logistics is a part of maximizing your setup. So not only do I have a good quality optic, a good quality light, and a good quality pistol, but I have the logistics to back it up. Now the logistics here also runs into things such as holsters. You have holster setups for outside the waistband, inside the waistband. Do you have all the additional accessories for keeping your pistol up and running when it comes to cleaning kits, maintenance kits? Same can be said for the rifles, right? And then another thing, especially when it comes to small parts, is having spare parts. So your rifle has a lot of small parts. Your pistol has a lot of small parts. You should have additional spare parts, and that's another part of this logistics equation of maximizing your setup. So this is all happening before we're buying another gun. Like, that's honestly what we should be doing. Do I think having a redundancy plan in place for additional guns is important? Yes, I do. But before we do all that, we should have a setup that's maximized to what we want. If you don't want an optic and you just run iron sights, that's fine. Now you're maximized based on your requirements. I understand that. Personally, I think an optic is more efficient, it's faster, and it gives me threat focus. So I prefer it, which means I want an optic on my pistols that I use for defensive purposes. And I also want it to be a quality optic because I need to be able to rely on it. So that is something that you need to consider when it comes to your requirements. But this is, for my requirements, a fully maximized pistol, not only in the sense of accessories and capability, but logistics. I've got the magazines, I've got the ammo, I've got the holsters, I've got all the accessories, and I have the spare parts. Spare parts are huge, especially small ones. We know when it comes to AR-15s, like, you're gonna break things like extractors. You know, gas rings are gonna eventually wear out. We know extractors on pistols break all the time. You have springs that eventually will wear out. You should have the ability to replace those things in your one gun before you even buy another one, because you should be using that gun enough to where you might actually need to replace some of those parts before just spending money on another gun just because. And this is all from personal experience, by the way. This isn't just me saying it because now I sit on my throne of really nice firearms that I've acquired over the years. This is me saying this from experience of buying guns when I shouldn't have, and I should have been optimizing what I already owned and shooting and training with it more, okay? So this is my handgun example of a fully maximized weapon system or setup, and this is my rifle example. Now, when it comes to spare parts, there's something else you need to keep in mind. You have to have the know-how and the skills to be able to actually maintain those weapon systems. Buying additional extractors or springs or whatever it may be isn't very helpful if you have no idea what you're doing. And you should probably at least have somebody in your group that does know how to do those things. At the bare minimum, you should be learning what you can as of now, because there's no guarantee you'll have someone around to do it for you. And if you really want to learn in depth about some of this stuff and be a little bit more of an asset, well, check out this other video sponsor we have for today. I want to take a second to thank SDI, the Sonoran Desert Institute, for supporting the channel. Now, I know what you're thinking, but if you want to learn gunsmithing or how to work with drones and become a better asset to your community without having to relocate or travel to a facility, SDI can provide you with that education. And it's an accredited college, so at the end you could come out with a degree. And whatever you do with that education thereafter is up to you. And of course, they're updating their programs and supplying additional equipment and tools, so the education you get will be valuable. So check out sdi.edu/magic to get additional information. There will be links in the description as well as in the pinned comment, and I thank SDI for their support. All right, a big thanks to SDI for supporting the channel. They're making a lot of changes over there, so I implore you to check it out in case you're interested, because things do seem to be improving. Now, we've gone through maximizing our setup when it comes to the accessories, when it comes to upgrading those accessories, the magazines, the ammo, and the spare parts. And what's next? Because at that point, we are pretty maximized, right? And this is, you know, the maximized Glock 45. So what's the next gun you buy? You have your maximized rifle, your maximized pistol, maybe your maximized shotgun, depending on your preparedness requirements. The next gun you buy is just the exact same gun again. And yeah, it's boring, it's not exciting, but it is the right thing to do. So here we have two Glock 45s, as you can see, nice and stock from the factory, other than, you know, accessories. But the reason is because this is a backup. So if this one, which is my maximized system, catastrophically fails, or I need to hand off another gun to somebody else, I have the exact same gun twice, which allows me to access all of the logistics that I've already put away for maximizing this particular handgun, and then leveraging it for this one in case something just goes wrong, or I can't access an additional pistol anymore, or maybe the frame cracks and then I need this one's frame in order to keep things up and running. Whatever happens, there's really no better way to build up redundancy than just having two of the same thing. It's boring, it's not fun, it feels almost like you're wasting money because you know you could just get another cool handgun or something different that makes you a little bit more satiated, but this is the right move. Now, here's something else to keep in mind, okay? As we play Glock roulette here. Okay. Unload it, make sure we're not doing anything crazy. This one, being a backup, doesn't necessarily need the maximization requirement to be met. This allows me to now try out less expensive optics, like this Hexion Tech Seeker. I can test it out on here, see if it works or not, and not feel like I'm in a rush to replace it with something better quality or higher end, because this is still the backup pistol. It doesn't have to be fully maximized, so you don't have to go all out and spend all the same money as you did on the actual maximized setup on the backup. But you do still have the internals and all of the compatibility of buying the same gun while having a little bit less pressure to make it as top tier as possible. So that's something else you can consider, is that once you have that second gun, you've already maximized your setup for the original, and now you can just kind of be a little more casual about this one. So I do like that as well, because it lets me keep the familiarity. I'm still great at shooting a Glock in comparison to some other firearms, and so this allows me to shoot more with this like training pistol and try out accessories and different setups that maybe I know aren't ideal, but you know, could be interesting, and then just keep and maintain my maximized setup in the process without ever having to sacrifice anything about it in order to, I don't know, try something new out or whatever it may be. Plus, I can take this one out on the range, shoot it more, drop it in the mud more, kick it across the soccer field more, and not feel as bad about it, because I always know the good one is sitting at home waiting for me if needed. So that is something else that you would want to do in the sense of maximizing your setup, is then just getting another one after you're done. Okay, fun how this all works, right? Now, let's move on to modernization. You can modernize a gun if it's all you have. Maximizing your setups right now might mean maximizing the gun you have versus buying another one to maximize. And I understand that. I've been in that position many times, where maybe all you have right now is something like this Henry Big Boy X model lever action. If I can just put that down, okay? So maybe this is all you have right now. And that's understandable. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a rifle that'll do the job of being a rifle. It's chambered in .357 Magnum, and it is a gun, and you can defend yourself with it, right? Is it what I would choose in an SHTF situation if I had actual, you know, enemies coming at me? Like, no, I have other options, right? Is it reasonable in the sense of like a survival / woods type gun? I think so. It's actually really good for that. But if this is all you have, understandable. And this is something that, you know, might do what you need it to do without having to do a lot with it. But you can maximize it if you want. And this is where the modernization discussion comes into play, because it's not always the right thing to do. Let's go ahead and put that back, okay? You can modernize that same rifle to this level if you want. This is the same rifle, but this is a custom job done by Mad Pig Customs, and it allows me access to things like an LPVO. It allows me to have a white light on there. It allows me to mount other devices if I want to add IR or anything else along those lines that this rifle would benefit from, including muzzle devices, which are on the way, but government shutdowns have a way of delaying such things. So this allows me to maximize that rifle into something like this. Is that the right move? Well, that's where things really start to get a little bit more gray. If all you have is a rifle like the Henry X big boy over there in 357 Magnum, and you want to maximize it, maximizing it to this level is going to cost more than buying a bare bones AR-15. And depending on where you live, if you have legal access to an AR-15 without it being neutered or anything like that, or having to learn how to jump through hoops, that might be a better route than maximizing your setup in that scenario. Because maximizing this 357 Magnum, although it comes out awesome and it's fun and it's very capable and can do a lot and definitely can defend you in certain circumstances, it's never going to reach the capability level of a generic AR-15. And that's just the reality of it. There's a private plane flying by right now that never happens. Like, not that type of plane. Weird. Anyway, so there are some arguments for modernization to say that like it can improve what you already have without having to get something new. And this is improved in the sense of capability, but it's also not necessarily financially the right route. If you have the money to do something like this anyway, there's a good chance that getting a different gun is a better option. And that's something I wanted to address in this video, because in the past, I've had things like M1As, and I used to run an M1A because in California, it was a lot easier to get around some of the restrictions by running an M1A while still having a semi-automatic capable rifle system. But I modernized multiple M1As over the years, and every time at the end, you're just left feeling like unsatisfied, right? And some of that's just personal decisions and choices made by me when it came to like the accessories or the stocks or whatever else I was choosing in order to try to modernize. But at the end of the day, it never got me to where I actually wanted to be. It was always just lacking somewhere. And in all reality, all I was trying to do was emulate an AR-10, but with a less than capable package in the sense of accuracy and functionality and everything else. So in that circumstance, it would have been better for me to probably figure out something else, or there's one other route here, which we'll talk about in just a second. But this is where, you know, modernization's capable. That lever action right there can be turned into this. And I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? And like, I wouldn't necessarily say you're doing it wrong in that circumstance, but I will say that financially there are better options, and that's something you should weigh out too, because modernization sometimes ends up costing more than just getting what makes more sense. Okay, now, see, I'm just not good at setting things down apparently. Now there is a little bit of an argument there to be had. For example, it's almost like I have a lot of examples today. We're having a conversation, I don't mind. This is my new office, by the way, just right in front of the dirt berm. It feels pretty nice. So, for example, here is an HK USP-45. This has been modernized, but it's already a relatively modern platform. But it also has a requirement that's met by having this pistol, for me, that I couldn't meet the same way with other guns. So this is where modernization starts to actually make sense in the sense of maximizing your setup. So we'll do the safety thing, because I know that's preferred, okay? There's no longer a decocking feature on this particular pistol. It is now a V9 instead of a V1, just in case anybody was wondering why I do that. Now, why is this modernized? Well, first off, USPs don't come cut for an optic generally, but this slide has had the Langdon tactical treatment, so we have access to a red dot. They also don't have rails in order to mount lights that are of a modern variety. But luckily we have companies like Machine Craft Replicas who make the Mr. 9, which is a very nice adapter rail that allows you to mount something like an X300 to a USP. So now we have a maximized weapon system on a less modern platform. Yeah, we all could have seen that coming. And what's nice about that is that this gives me access to something that other modern pistols don't necessarily provide, which is why modernizing this gun became reasonable to do. What do I mean by that? First off, it's a USP. So we already have reliability, we already have durability, we already have longevity built into the mix. Great. We also have a semi-automatic platform shooting modern pistol cartridges. You can get them in 9mm, 40, 45. This one's a 45, right? So there's not really a drawback to having a pistol like this one, except for the fact that these generally acceptable accessories these days are harder to mount and use in conjunction with this gun. But this gun also provides me with a really large trigger guard. And because of that, I'm willing to maximize this setup in order to have access to that trigger guard, because where I live is extremely cold because I'm in North Dakota. It's so cold that if I don't have the ability to wear gloves and shoot a handgun, then I just don't shoot a handgun. And the gloves I need to wear where I live are very thick in order to provide any real level of protection. And in order to wear very thick gloves and shoot a handgun, you have to have a very large trigger guard. And almost no other pistols have a trigger guard large enough for the size of gloves I need to wear where I live in order to shoot all year round. A Glock trigger guard is nowhere near the size of a USP trigger guard. And that's just the reality of it. So I have this requirement being met of a gun I can shoot when it's extremely cold, but now it's not meeting my requirements in the sense of modernization, because I like having red dots, I like having lights, and I like having access to all the other logistics and parts and all the other stuff. So now I have to start maximizing that department while using things like the Mr. 9 adapter or companies like Langdon Tactical to provide a solution for mounting an optic to a less modern pistol. So in this situation, modernization makes sense, because not only is it a good high quality pistol that's still relatively modern in the terms of, you know, capacity and functionality, but it also fits a role that I can't accomplish elsewhere really at all. And trust me, I've tried. So this is where modernization starts to make sense, and then maximizing based off of that also makes sense. I'm still maximizing this platform because I'm still looking for, you know, good quality holsters that accept, you know, the light and the adapter and everything else. And I'm still looking for a couple other things in the spare parts department. But in reality, like at the end of the day, the other good thing about a USP is that there's not much that's likely to go wrong with this particular pistol because it's a freaking USP. So this makes sense, okay? Now, examples. Here is something that I want you to kind of keep in mind as well, okay? This is a Henry big boy revolver. It's chambered in .357 Magnum. It is pretty cool, actually. I actually like it, but it's also very unaccessorizable. This particular revolver, it's not set up to be able to put a optics plate on top. It's not set up to do anything fancy. It's not cut for moon clips. It's a bare bones revolver that does the job of being a revolver, right? And so if you have a revolver like this, the amount of energy and effort and digging it's going to require to be able to actually modernize this thing or maximize it is basically pointless. If this is your handgun, which a .357 Magnum revolver handgun is not a terrible choice. There's a lot of reasons why it would be reasonable to have a revolver, right? Even though I think these days, something like a Glock tends to make a little more sense. But regardless, if you have a revolver like this one, and it's reliable and it shoots and it does what it's supposed to do, right? Then maximizing this is just going to go basically straight into logistics, right? You're going to go straight into spare parts, ammo, and holsters. That's about it, because that's all you can really do with this besides getting crazy. And if you start getting crazy with things to the point where you're getting a bunch of custom parts welded together and all kinds of weird stuff in order to accomplish a weird mission or goal, now we're losing track of what we're doing. In all reality, that's just kind of the way it works, right? And this revolver is just, it's fine by itself the way it is. Could it be better? Are there other revolvers that have better sighting systems and things of that nature, or give you access to things like pick rail and stuff like that? Yep, there certainly are. But if this is the one you have, and you have it for reasons that you prefer because maybe it just fits the style you like better or whatever it is, then don't worry about maximizing it in the sense of all that stuff. Just worry about logistics, worry about being able to draw it, be good with it when you shoot it, and just worry about maybe that next purchase being something a little bit, more accessible in the sense of what provides you with more capability, okay? So this actually leads me to a good closing point, okay? So we've gone through maximizing your setup before buying another gun, right? And then we've gone through like what gun to buy after that, which is just the same gun again. I know, it's getting really annoying, isn't it? Geez, I have 2 Glock 45s out here, 2 Henry Big Boy X 357 lever actions. Like, it's almost like there's a pattern, right? And we've gone into modernization, where it makes sense and where it doesn't. Modernizing that lever action is cool and doable, and it does offer capabilities. But is it financially smart to do when you're trying to, maximize capabilities when you could just, for less money, buy something with better capabilities out of the box? That's another consideration to make. But there are times where maximizing makes sense if there's a reason behind it that is practical. Now, the last part of this conversation is, what if you only have a stripped down gun? Okay, so this is a stripped down gun. There's nothing on it. There's no accessories. There's nothing fancy, right? But let's apply this to like a rifle. Let's say you have a bare bones, like PSA M4 forgery type, 16-inch carbine gas system rifle in 5.56 that has, a plastic clamshell handguard and all like the basic furniture. And then all you have on it with the front sight post is maybe a flip up rear sight or a carry handle sight, right? Let's say that's all you got. That's your rifle and that's all it is. Stripped down is fine. Like, stripped down guns do just work. Like, this gun will work. If I need to use it in self-defense, it is a gun and it will work and it does shoot where you aim. Like, these are things that like we have to just be honest about as well. Like, this is cool. And this has a lot of capability, and this is like pretty awesome, right? But this also will defend you if needed. Depending on the circumstance, this is gonna do a lot better in almost every circumstance, but this still does the bare minimum of defending your life with a handgun or a firearm in general, right? And I mean, we see that in places like Ukraine and all over the world right now, where a stripped down bare bones AK is still doing the basic function of what it needs to do, not as efficiently, but it still does it. So when you have a stripped down gun, if that's all you have, I think that's fine. And I think that's okay. As long as it's all the way stripped down because you are, out shooting it, training with it, and you don't have the resources to go and get all the additional accessories. You don't have the resources for an optic and a light and a sling and all the other things you might need. And maybe you're saving up and working on those things, and that's fine. Like, you should be like mentally okay with that. However, if you have a stripped down gun, right, and you haven't maximized it at all, but it's capable of being maximized further than something like this one, and your next thing to do is just buy another gun instead of maximizing that stripped down gun, that is where it doesn't make a lot of sense. A stripped down, AR-15 or an AK or even a revolver or even a Glock, right, with nothing at all, just the way it comes from the factory, is totally acceptable if it's your only gun. But the second you add another gun and you haven't taken care of all the stuff you need to take care of for that first gun, now we're in a problematic territory of prioritization, right? So just wanted to make sure we address that, because although I think having something fully set up and capable is a good way to go, there's nothing wrong with a factory Glock with no optic or light or whatever. It's still gonna shoot, it's still capable of defending you. But if I have that, and then I go and I also buy this, and I don't maximize that Glock first, now we're creating some problems for ourselves, in my opinion. And that's just been my experience. Take it from a guy who has modernized some guns that shouldn't have been modernized. Take it from a guy who has spent a lot of money on buying a bunch of different guns just to find out I should have just bought the same gun twice. And take it from a guy who honestly also appreciates and understands why something like this is actually just nice to have sometimes without having to worry about all that other crap. Because in all reality, like, as cool as this thing is, that other lever action that fell down is still capable and much lighter and much handier, and I don't care about beating it up as much, as you can tell. So, do yourself a favor. Ask the question, is my setup maximized? The answer is no. Why are you buying that other gun, right? And yes, is there some nuance here of, do you have a rifle, a pistol, and a shotgun? Okay, and a 22, let's say. Okay, that makes sense if you're buying a pistol because you need a pistol, and then you're like, hey, I also need a rifle. Okay, I can understand that. But if you're buying a pistol and then you buy a different pistol, even though this one's not maximized, we have some problems. If you're buying an AR-15 and an AK, but neither one of them are maximized, we have some issues. And don't forget, the biggest part of maximization that I think is the most important is the logistics portion. If you're not buying magazines, ammo, and spare parts, we got issues. So, let me know what you think in the comments below. This was just a conversation to try to give you some things to consider. I think this day and age right now, while we're in a slump per se, is a really good time to maximize. Rather than getting a bunch of new stuff, because we already know what works and we know what works efficiently and does a good job, why not maximize those things rather than just freaking out about the next new thing that comes around? And as somebody who has maximized systems in all those categories, I can feel confident about checking out a non-maximized pistol because I don't need it to be that for me, right? And I think that's another thing to keep in mind is that if you have your main go-to firearm of each category fully maximized, now you can play around with stuff like a fun little revolver because it's not a big deal if it doesn't fit that role or do what you want it to do because you have the other thing for that, right? So, if you want to support the channel, check out magicprepper.com. It has a lot of resources as well as ways you can get stuff that would be pertinent to this conversation while also providing additional supplemental resources to the channel, which I would greatly appreciate, as well as potential discount codes. There's also the MP Field tool there, which is a great tool for any rifleman in case that's something you go out and do when it comes to shooting on the range and being a little bit more dynamic. It can provide you with some additional assistance if things go wrong, or you just want, I don't know, just like a backup plan that weighs less than an ounce. And of course, if you want to talk to some people and maybe you're looking for a new Discord server for some reason that one you were a part of before doesn't exist anymore, I still have one. If you want to come hang out, you can, and you can find that information on my website. So, like I said, any feedback is welcome. Just trying to share my experiences and just give you guys something to consider and talk about because in all honesty, I'm just having a good time out here. And the difficulties of the world lately have been a lot of pressure and weight, and coming out here and just having discussions like this one is what kind of made me start the channel to begin with and what I really enjoy. So maybe we'll do more of these in the future. And till next time, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.